Okay, welcome everybody to the Kirklees Scrutiny panel, last one of this municipal year. We'll just go through membership of the panel. I'm Councillor Andrew Cooper, I'm the chair of the panel.
Councillor John Lawson, panel member.
Councillor Eric Firth, panel member.
And online we have Oliver Gibson, who's an independent member of the panel. And we have apologies from Councillor Richard Smith. Okay. So next, minutes of the previous meeting. To approve minutes of the previous meeting, any issues, anything anybody wants to raise on there? No? Okay. Any declarations of interest? No? Admission of the public. This meeting is open and is in the public session. We have no deputations or petitions. And our first item on the agenda is post-16 transport statement 24-25, and we have a presentation. Over to Martin Smith and Catherine Armitage. Martin Wood, sorry. And Russ Williams.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Presentation to start with, about 20 minutes or so, and then open to questions following that presentation. So a bit of background on the passenger travel team or home to school transport. To our post-16 and pre-16, the purpose of the team really is to ensure compliance with statutory duties which sit under the Education Act 1996 alongside the statutory guidance that goes with that. We arrange home to school transport for all eligible children, and in the main, as a general rule, eligibility is for students between 16 and 19 years of age for post-16 at the start of the academic year, or if they start their course before the 19th birthday for a maximum of 3 years. Students must be resident within Kirklees Council, and they must be attending a full-time course, and they must also be attending their nearest college or school to their home address. In 2023, we arranged transport for approximately 1,050 pre-16 students and 300 post-16 students. Our duties for pre and post-16 are different. So for pre-16, our statutory duty is that we must provide transport for eligible children. That is physical transport, a vehicle. We can provide alternatives to physical transport, but that's only with the consent of parents, and that alternative could be mileage payment, a personal travel budget, or independent travel training. For post-16 duties, we must produce and publish. Apologies, I've lost the presentation. Let's try again. Back in. Pre-16 duties, we must provide physical transport, but that can be, we can provide alternatives with the parental consent. For post-16, our duties are that we must produce and publish a transport statement by the 31st of May each year, and that transport statement must consider what assistance we are going to provide to help facilitate the attendance at further education. A decision can be made that we provide no assistance, and assistance does not mean that it has to be physical transport. It can be other assistance similar to pre-16, like a personal travel payment or budget or independent travel training, but we don't need the parental consent to do that. 2022 and 23, the financial position of the service were for transport costs alone. Pre-16 cost us just over 6 million for taxis and minibuses. Post-16, 2.6 million. We provide escorts, passenger assistance for a number of our students. The cost of that service was 1.95 million, and total cost for 22-23 for the financial year was circa 12.1 million to provide the service as a whole. The service has seen significant year-on-year cost increases. For pre-16 in 2022-23, it was up 33% on the previous year, and for post-16, it was up 26% on the previous year. Number of factors involved in that is an increase in demand. As you'll know, the increase in numbers of EHCPs, that is a direct link to providing transport. So that's had a knock-on effect. Our number of routes are increasing, especially the use of single taxis. That's due to the complexity of the children that we're having to transport and their medical conditions being more complex. We're also seeing still knock-on effects from, I know this will sound surprising, from COVID in the taxi licensing service, in that during COVID we lost a number of taxi drivers. That has left a shortage for vehicles and drivers to carry out school transport, and that's driven up the cost. That is recovering, but it's taking a while for that to feed through into the school transport service. And the operators that we do have on the system that we procure with, their costs have also increased because of the interest rates, fuel prices, building prices, and cost of staff that they have. So a number of factors that are contributing to our cost increase. It's accepted that we can't continue with that, and the service is undergoing a number of transformation options and a number of work streams that are either ongoing or will come on board over the next 12 months. So we've conducted a review of single taxis and the number of single routes that we have, and where we can, we have merged routes so that they're on larger vehicles, reducing that cost. We have gone through our list of families and offered more tailored approach around personal travel payments. So is the parents and family able to take their own child, and we'll offer a contribution and a payment for that. And also changing the mindset of the team and parents and schools around the use of single taxis, that is a last resort, and it's only where there is the need for single taxi that's what we will provide. We're also looking at the contract that we have with our operators that provide transport for us, strengthening the terms and conditions. One of the problems we've had is around operators just handing routes back to us saying it's no longer financially viable or they can't do that route anymore. We then have to go out to bid on that route again, and that's coming in at a higher price. So we're looking at tightening up on those terms and conditions around how we deal with that side of things. And also looking at a more detailed breakdown of what the operator costs are. So at the moment we just get a single pricing of what that route's going to cost. We don't necessarily know what the mileage proportion of that is, what the business costs are, what the staffing costs are, and we are looking to be able to get that information so that we can look at value for money as well as what that price is. We're also looking at an in-house fleet. As a pilot, we're looking at between 18 and 20 vehicles. We've got existing vehicles within the council's fleet that we feel are underutilised, that we're going to be approaching services for to try and bring them under the wing of school transport. We're also looking to purchase 10 vehicles. That's currently going through a flight path for a separate decision on some capital spend for that. And we're hoping for a September 25 where we will have our own in-house fleet and that we can make use of. And then obviously the post-16 transport statement, which is the purpose of today's briefing. So the proposed changes to the post-16 transport statement, we want to move away from providing traditional transport via a physical vehicle, and more to a model of a personal travel payment being the default. However, we accept that that isn't going to be appropriate in all circumstances, and where the need necessitates, the policy's been developed so that we do have that discretion where we may still provide transport, physical transport. The personal travel payments that we have looked at are based on a banding, and that banding is on the distance from the home address to the setting, and you can see in the table there, those are the rates that we consulted upon. So 4 different bands, less than 3 miles, we consulted upon an offer of £300. That's the equivalent of a bus pass. The justification for that is that if you live within 3 miles of your setting, you're likely to be in a more urban, an area where the transport links are a bit better, but we do accept that that isn't always the case. And then the 3 bandings between 3 and 10, £1,000, between 10 and 20, 2,000, and over 23,000, recognising that those that are travelling the furthest they'll have the greatest expense. So we went out for consultation on the 14th of November to the 31st of December. We received 130 responses to that consultation. The consultation was quite wide, so parents of existing children on transport with Pecan, public, ward councillors, schools and colleges and governors, and we also offered a number of drop-in sessions where we linked in with the college and Pecan and attended their regular meetings, both face-to-face and virtual. The results of the consultation were no surprise, really. The vast majority of the responses cited financial impact on families as a concern, as well as impact on the wider family, and families with multiple children going in different directions, and the impact. But like I said, no surprises really on that, on the responses that came back. Next steps for the policy, it's due to be considered by Cabinet on the 9th of April. If adopted, it would be applicable from September 2024. The application procedure would need amending and communicating to families pretty quickly following, if Cabinet were to approve the policy. It will increase our administrative burden in the first year while things settle down, but we are looking at how we adapt the service to deal with that in the short term by putting temporary resources in place if it does get adopted. I think one of the key things around the policy is that when we were developing the policy, we looked at what was going on nationally, and there were 3 or 4 councils that had moved to this model of operating, and I think it's fair to say that a number of other authorities are looking at this way of delivering assistance, both regionally and nationally. So it is becoming more prominent to move to a personal travel payment, rather. And any questions?
Okay, thanks for that. We'll take a batch of questions. Initially, Councillor Firth.
I'm just wondering, Chair, on the last point, we're moving to this new model, and you did say that other local authorities, whether they're recent local ones to us or throughout the country, are using this system. How has it worked in those authorities? Have you done any follow-up?
I'll change my mind and go. Let's not do batches. Let's just answer questions as they come.
So when we were developing this, we did speak to Wokingham Council as an example of who's introduced this, and they've said the same, that the parents were concerned over this model and that it wouldn't cover the cost of transport. Also, the administrative burden in the initial implementation of it was more significant, but they've settled down now, and the process is working. It's been in place 2 or 3 years now, I think, with Wokingham. And they're still continuing to do that, so haven't stepped back from that approach once it's been implemented.
Well, that does give me some confidence moving forward, that if it's embedded in other authorities and it can be seen to be working, then that must give parents and carers some confidence too. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always pleased to see our council following best practice in other places. Yeah, there is a danger sometimes that councils take an approach which is, if it's not been invented here, we don't do it. So I think it's a good thing to see. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a couple of questions. Do you want me to kind of go ahead? So to begin with, I think I had a question about what our understanding is of any impacts on safeguarding. We're dealing with some of our most vulnerable children when we're dealing with this topic. So I'd probably just like to tease out a little bit about that, about what considerations were made about any further safeguarding that might occur if parents are changing their mode of transport. So there's that one. There was something in me that was talking about, or that was worried about, actually the transfer of risk that we're undertaking here in terms of prices. Yes, we're asking more of our parents, which is a model, you know, as we've said, which is fine, which works in other councils, and that would be okay. Of course, what we're also doing, though, at the same time, is exposing them to the risk of price hikes that perhaps in a way that councils aren't exposed to, that we can negotiate en bloc. We can use our sort of purchasing power, as it were, that individual parents might not be able to do, and they will be exposed to things like fuel hikes and things like that, which can be quite dramatic and sudden. So there's that little bit I'd want to tease out as well. There is a piece on page 22 of the report about sharing information. It's kind of carpooling, basically, and transport pooling. I'm a bit worried about that in terms of its actual functional implication, you know, its application. Can you actually share that information in a legal way, and two, in a practical way? Will it work? So I had that question as well. Yeah. I could.
Shall we do with those first?
I'm just
keen to make sure that people sort of are able to track the questions and the answers.
I think on the safeguarding matter, I think it's fair to say that was in the responses to the consultation, that was also highlighted, and we recognise that not just in relation to this, that we need to do some work in general around the message that we send out for safeguarding. So the parents will have the same access to the same taxi drivers that we have access to as school transport. So we would want parents to use Kirklees licensed drivers because they're under the council's control. This is under the licensing service sits under the same directorate. We've got those links with taxi licensing. But also across West Yorkshire, we've worked hard within licensing to try and get, you know, as close as we can to unified convictions policy, training policies across West Yorkshire. So where parents are on the border or can't get a Kirklees vehicle, we would be advising to use a West Yorkshire licensed driver. I think the key thing is that we need to get that message across to parents around the vetting that taxi licensing do on drivers and the training that they do, the level of DBS, and that our convictions policy follows national best practice and is very robust, and that's the message that we need to get across to parents to try and offer that reassurance that, you know, we're confident as we can be that if they're using a Kirklees licensed driver or the wider West Yorkshire region, that their children are going to be safe in those vehicles.
Thank you. It's just in that drive for economy, will that get lost in the message? You know, as parents look for cheaper options, maybe that might go to the back of their minds. and it's just about how we stress how important that is to our parents. So it's just, I know they'll be thinking about that anyway. It's just, we really do need to bottom that out. Thank you.
Just on the price hikes, yes, they're as susceptible as the council are to those price hikes. We probably a bit less than us because the operators know, well, see the council as the one with the money and will hike prices for us more than they probably would for the general public. However, we have already spoken to the college, and this links onto your third point about joining parents together. The college have offered to work with us around getting parents together to be able to share transport and that cost, and whether there's work that we can do with the college on that and linking parents up to try and reduce that cost. There's also within the policy significant discretion for officers where if it's more expedient that we provide that because it is cheaper for us to do that, then we can still provide that transport for our parents. So it's not that we're just cutting it off completely. There are other options within the discretions in the policy for us to do that.
Just briefly, just on a practical matter of the pooling, carpooling and car sharing, is that if you're on a route, as it were, that means that one child is probably going to have to get ready quite significantly earlier than the child at the end of that route. And if we have a single point of pickup, then we're in the same basket, aren't we? We're in the same consideration that children have to get to that pickup point. So it's just that needs resolving.
Yep.
Commentary on that? No?
It's
Just what it is?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that we're going to have to work through with both the college, PCAN and parents around that and change things as we're going along. Even though it's in other local authorities and we can learn from other local authorities, it's going to be a case of seeing how it operates and changing as we go along. And the policy allows us to do that.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Tom Brailsford, Director of Children's Services, Kirklees. Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, Councillor Lawson, and I think particularly with the post-16, we hope that that's lessened a bit in terms of the fact that we have, Kirklees College, is when the majority of our children and young people are going, and I think there are maybe 3 fixed sites across that. So, in terms of that route sharing, but that actually is the case for the majority of our children and young people who are getting school transport across the board. I think, and particularly that transport where it's out of area, so where children and young people might be in an independent school out of area, that can become particularly complex and often ends up with single transport costs. But I think particularly the idea of hubs and getting the routes right, and I think as has been pointed out, I think the college and a couple of colleges actually have said they'd be more than happy to broker services on behalf of parents. So I think for me, the whole idea about when our children are post 16 promoting their independence, if you look at the detail about having a bus pass or, going with it, walking or cycling, and the majority of our children and young people in these settings have got social, emotional and mental health needs. There's a very small proportion that have got severe disabilities that require specialist transport. So I think that idea that we're trying to provide some more independence for our children and young people and some more control for our families, and picking up on your point about the price rise hikes, I have spoken to colleagues in different authorities up and down the country, and often it is the case that when local authorities book in transport, they're charged one price, and when it's a private booking, they're charged another price. Now, I'm not commenting on that locally, but that is seen in other areas. So I think there is some economies of scale to be found there. Thank you, Chair.
No, just a comment on just to sort of recognise Tom's comment there on some of the beneficial sides of this and the independence of this, and some of the in the report it's mentioned that people being comfortable and confident when they reach the place of education. And I think that's, you know, it's probably easy to lose sight of this as we look into detail. It's probably easy to lose sight of that aspect of it. So I just reinforce that, and thanks, Tom, for bringing that up.
Okay. A few questions from me. I'm quite interested in the in-house fleet and how that's going to operate, the purchase of 10 vehicles. I just wonder if you could give us some commentary on some of the work you've done on cost-benefit of the proposals, on how those will apply. Also looking at how we might utilise those vehicles outside of school travel time to get maximum benefit out of those, and any income that we might raise from them in that time. Wondering about if we've considered low carbon transport of some description as part of that in terms of the purchasing that we're doing. And the other thought was, are we going to mix up pre and post 16 in terms of the offer using the in-house fleet? So.
Thanks, Chair. Martin Wood, Head of Public Protection for Kirklees Council. So we've, over the past 6 months, and possibly going back a bit longer than that, as we've been considering a range of things to look at transforming the home-to-school transport service, try and make it more efficient, try and make it more cost-effective. As mentioned, one of those things is an in-house fleet. And we've modelled a range of sort of options for the council about how that could be developed. We currently have around 460 individual routes that we operate on home-to-school transport. And I think it would be impossible to ever expect to have all those routes to be provided by in-house fleet, because the size of that transport operation would just be too large to operate for any single local authority. We've also visited some other local authorities that already have their own in-house fleet. One of the most prominent local ones is Calderdale. Up until very recently, 100% of their minibus travel was provided by an in-house fleet. They've currently just had that capacity exceeded. So we were very interested in how their in-house fleet operation works and the principles around the number of vehicles compared to the number of routes. The challenges that they have in operating that service with drivers and maintenance and the purchase of vehicles, especially in relation to looking for the future and looking into low carbon alternatives to provide that transport. So as we've been working through all those options for us here at Kirklees, we decided the best starting point would be a pilot, to looking at around 20 vehicles currently. To operate any more of those vehicles, it would place significant strain in our existing transport fleet operations in terms of the amount of mechanical bay space that we've got in our depots and everything else. So to go any more than 20 would, because the storage place for them, the place to maintain them and everything else, would mean significant capital investment in depot space and everything else. Hence why looking at an in-house fleet. There's a paper coming forward to an individual cabinet member decision at some point in mid-April, and the papers associated with those are going to be published within the next week. So a lot more detail will be in the public domain associated with that. But just as a bit of a flavour, the cost-benefit analysis that we've done is looking at the top 20 most expensive routes that we currently operate and projecting that those costs out over the next 10 years, which is about the expected lifespan of any vehicle that we might use and purchase. And using not the 20 to 30% year-on-year prices inflation that we've seen in our current route profile, but modelled that out over a 10 and a 20% year-on-year price. So try and make it a bit more conservative in terms of predicting what the whole 10-year life cost will be of operating a vehicle on the existing transport arrangements through contracting with private hire and public service vehicle operators. And then looking at the capital costs of purchasing our own vehicles, the employment costs of employing our own drivers, the maintenance costs, the fuel costs, and everything else. And as you'll see when the paper is published, there's a significant, a relatively modest in year one price saving for the council to operate a fleet. However, the increase in costs of a fleet operation are much more in the council's control. For example, we won't be subject to the market forces that we've seen in terms of the price increases. We'd be much more subject to just day-to-day inflationary cost increases that in terms of the council's operation, the increase in fuel price, the increases in driver employment costs. The vehicle costs will virtually remain the same other than through maintenance price increases. So those costs are significantly more within the council's control and are much less year on year compared with the market forces we've seen from contracting out. So when modelled those across over the 10-year lifespan of the vehicle, significant savings are realised year on year on year. So it's a real investor save prospect for the council. However, some of those, or quite a lot of that, are based on assumptions about what the future will bring in terms of future price increases, both through contracted out and the council's own internal costs. Hence why a pilot has been is going to be established first to test out those assumptions and then decide at some point in the future whether it's worth investing significantly in more vehicles and more depot space to be able to service and maintain those vehicles. So it's an exciting prospect actually for Kirklees to consider this as an option. It has worked very well for other authorities, but their setup costs have been baked into that service over decades. So, you know, their ongoing costs are much different to us. We're starting from fresh. In terms of the low carbon alternatives, when we were considering investing, or the prospect of investing significantly in a future fleet of a large number of vehicles, that would have to happen over a number of years, just because the size of the ask would be too much to say 100 vehicles all in 1 year. So we've looked at the initial pilot to be new diesel vehicles, just mainly because they're easily available in the marketplace. Their purchase costs at the moment are significantly cheaper than the electric or low carbon alternatives. And we don't really have to invest significantly or at all in somewhere to store those vehicles. We just need to find a parking place for them initially, and they can be maintained within the existing council operations. So as an initial pilot, to make sure we can get that off the ground quickly without significant additional costs, we're proposing to just purchase diesel vehicles at the moment, but with a very strong eye on any future development of that fleet to be low carbon electric vehicles, because at that point, we will need to invest in our depot space one way or the other, whether that's to maintain them as diesels or to maintain them and charge them as electrics. As we all know, that the purchase cost of electric vehicles is reducing year on year. So at the point we'll be making that decision about expanding the fleet, we'll hopefully be at a place where the purchase cost of electric vehicles will be much more in line with the purchase cost of traditional diesel or petrol vehicles. So the balance of cost will be much more neater than it is at the moment. So unfortunately, it's not an environmental incentive here, this initiative. It's a test the water on, can we operate a fleet of vehicles in-house? Once we've tested that premise and we can do that, then we can look at how we do that in a more sustainable way. And ideally, allowing that sort of 3 years pilot process to run through will change the economics and purchase price of electric vehicles. Electric minibuses are extremely expensive.
I follow the logic, does make sense. I did ask about outside school hours, how we might utilise the vehicles.
Yes, so part of the principle of the pilot is to retain some capacity within those 20 vehicles. So we're currently modelling it at 2 vehicles will be not used for home to school transport and will be used one as a backup in case one of the other vehicles is off the road, but also being able to utilise that vehicle across the council's fleet. So although we'll be looking to utilise existing vehicles that are used in various places, whether that's children's or adults, there is still a need for those vehicles to be used, for example, for transporting adults with needs to their daycare centres and everything else. So the principle of the pilot is not just to test its applicability for home-to-school transport, but how it can be used to support the wider council needs for transport, especially around minibus transport across a number of different services. So we're sort of testing two things at once. In terms of how the fleet can be used outside of sort of core business of the council, utilised by maybe community groups and things like that, I understand that there's a policy coming through from the transport services about how existing council fleet can be used by community groups, and that policy hasn't been agreed yet. Anticipating it will be shortly. So once that new policy comes into fruition, just for the council's current fleet, we can work through the process of how that policy could work for the fleet that we'll have for home-to-school transport. And I don't anticipate it being any different to a minibus that might be parked at a daycare centre, for example, to one that's going to be parked in the depot that's going to be used for home-to-school transport. And we've got 18 months to iron all those prospects out. And again, it hasn't been fully agreed what that policy is going to be, so it's a sort of chicken before the egg scenario, really. But we anticipate there will be a community use policy for council minibuses. Once we have that policy, we'll look at how we can integrate it into our own fleet, because it just makes common sense that I have a minibus that's sat outside during the day at a scout hut, for argument's sake, and then used on an evening, and then buses that are being used during the day in the council's fleet and sat in a depot on a tea time. It just doesn't make common sense. So we are very keen to be able to utilise our fleet in that way, not necessarily as an income stream, but just as a way of better utilising boxes of metal on the street.
One more question from me before I pass on to the members of the panel. Has any consideration been given to schools with minibuses themselves operating routes for us?
Yes, there has. That was actually one of the first things that we did when we were considering the homeschool transformation and the principle of having an in-house fleet. We had a number of conversations with a number of school business managers and heads about the prospect of doing exactly as you've suggested. And although we did have some initial positive conversations with some schools around the principle, I think when we started working through the detail about who would actually drive these vehicles, at the moment, quite a lot of those school buses are driven by teachers or teaching assistants as and when they need to go on school trips or after school extracurricular activities such as sport. So those people are utilising the school building during the day, and especially in the parts of the day when we need the transport operation to happen. So the practicalities of doing it just didn't actually work out in reality, unfortunately. It's something that we still want to explore, but I think until we can provide a group of drivers to be able to add an additional group of people to drive those buses, we're just not going to be able to facilitate it, because the teachers and teaching assistants are needed at the schools at the time when we need them to be driving those vehicles for home-to-school transport. So I think we've parked that piece of work for the moment. We're sort of focusing at the moment on making these changes to the post-16 and getting our own in-house fleet sorted out. I think once we've got over some of those hurdles and proved some of these principles, we can then start looking at possibly providing alternatives to schools in terms of either drivers or even the use of their minibuses. So, for example, we might find a scenario where a school might not need their own minibus in the future because, similar to the community use principles that we just discussed, they'd just be able to use ours. But until we've actually got the fleet as a viable option for them to use outside the school, normal school day, there isn't that offer for them to be able to understand and use. So it's working through everything once we've actually established the core fleet of vehicles.
Thank you. Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. My question was about procurement. You've stated quite clearly that EV vehicles are out of reach at the moment, but in this pilot that we're doing, can you ensure that the engines are Euro 6? That's a must, because they are nearly clean. Not as clean as electric, but very much they're a good engine. Euro 7s are on the way, by the way. That's another. Euro 6 will do fine for now.
So the vehicles that we're purchasing will be the most modern highest euro category possible at the point of purchase.
Okay. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question about, we're using flat fees and flat rates at the moment. That's what's suggested in the report. Now, for some people, these changes might present a bit of an inconvenience, and to some it would be more significant. I think I'd like just a little bit of commentary on what measures you took to make this as fair as possible, so that burdens weren't landing on particular people and particular individuals and families. So if you could just talk us through that a little bit, that'd be grand.
Quite correct, Councillor Lawson. When you introduce a policy that has sort of basic principles within it, there'll be a different experience for different people who access the policy. There's only so far you can go to try and iron out some of those unevenness, because that's unfortunately the reality of having this type of policy. Part of the consultation was as a mechanism to try and tease out from people who would be subject to the policy to find out some of the individual difficulties. And we've tried to identify alternative sources for some of those families that are receiving the most significant difficulties. For example, there's a government-led bursary scheme that families can have access to, which also can be used to support transport. The colleges can also look at what support that they can give individually to help support their pupils get into their place of education. And that'll be sort of something that will have to be worked through in a bit more detail over the coming, well, not just the first year of implementation, but subsequent years as well, because we are shifting the responsibility from the council more to families, and also we have to recognise that the colleges are going to have to take some more responsibility in terms of how they can support their pupils to get into school and to college. There's also, as Russell mentioned in the original presentation, we haven't, this isn't an absolute carte blanche, you will only be getting the personal travel payment. We have retained some discretion within the policy to look at additional factors and where exceptional circumstances exist to arrange transport in the normal way. And that's something that a lot of authorities who have already introduced a very similar policy haven't actually done. Their policies are much more, it's either this or nothing. What we've tried to do is say the principle is this as the first step, and we expect the majority of pupils to get the personal travel payments, but retaining some discretion where there's exceptional circumstances to do things differently.
Just thinking that sometimes family life can be quite messy. It doesn't belong in papers, and we need to be open to those situations and those scenarios that are not covered by policy. And it sounds as though we've tried to be a little bit open-ended about some of the policy conditions. But there are scenarios where people might feel as though they have to change working hours, jobs even, and it's those that we have to be alive to those difficulties that people face.
Okay. Yeah, I picked that up. So the savings of the implementation of this on post 16 is 1.6 million, identified in the report. In terms of the monitoring of this going forward, when do you expect to see if that's reflected? When are you going to report back to see if that's reflected in reality?
It's not so much a difficulty, but this is where it's different from the council's financial reporting periods to academic year. So we've modelled on an academic year, and that's what we have to be mindful of. But it'll be monitored on a monthly basis through our normal budget monitoring processes within the service as to what the impact of the change in policy is. But actual overall savings won't be known for the full academic year, so that'll be July next year. Okay.
Anything else from members of the panel? So thanks for that. Really interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see how the implementation of this goes, and something that we can keep an eye on. Okay, thanks. Next item. Next item is with the performance data. So a verbal update of the highlights of that. Over to Kieran.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. Kieran Lord, Service Director for Resources Improvements and Partnerships within Children's Services. I'm going to go first and cover some of the key highlights of the areas that I have oversight of. I've got Rob with me covering for Vicky today that will be covering some of those areas also. I'm going to start by talking about some really great areas where we've been seeing some really consistent and improved areas of practice and data, and also going to talk a little bit about how our review of that data is helping us to continue with some of that great work, and how it's going to also hopefully help us with some of our challenges, which I'm also going to share. I'll start with our timeliness in relation to our initial child protection case conferences. This is our section 47 inquiries, as we've discussed previously. We had a period of time where there had been a dip in timeliness, but what I'd like to say is that we've worked very closely across directorates, with oversight regularly provided to strategic directors and service directors in relation to this. It's been an absolute priority. Our levels are consistently in 95% plus range in terms of being on target. We've got individual reports on any areas where there's any dip below that on individual cases, and it's usually due to particular circumstances for individual children. So I think it's a good example about a combination of really working in close partnership across directorates, but also that senior level oversight has on improving our data. I'll come on to some of the challenges in relation to some of our data in relation to health performance. However, it needs to be celebrated that we continue to have a very consistent and high percentage of reviews of looked after children's health held within timeframes of 97.5%. We maintain, and this is something again we've discussed repeatedly, we maintain a fantastic performance in terms of the number of our children and young people living in a family setting. Again, in line with our principles of trying to keep our children living in the most family type setting as possible, where we know they're most likely to benefit from greater outcomes. Nearly 3/4 of all of our children looked after are in a family type setting. That's consistently above statistical neighbours and national average, and that's a purposeful strategy that we undertake in terms of our investment in those services that support us with doing so. We do continue to be successful in keeping children and young people living safely with family and friends, but there is, of course, a need for our children in some circumstances for their safety, amongst other reasons, to utilise fostering and residential services, and I'll talk a little bit around data relating to that area shortly. We've got some slightly potentially contradictory data on the face of it in terms of our stability of placements. Our long-term stability, so this is for our children that are placed away from a family setting, continues to improve. So as I've said, 71% of children have been in their place for at least 2 years. So that shows the consistency of that placement. However, the challenge that we face is the percentage of children that have experienced more than 2 or 3 moves within that period of time has also increased. So what we're seeing is a small number of children who are moving a number of times, whilst we've got a higher percentage of children that have a longer term placement. Now, whilst that is an area that we're focusing on, I would stop short of saying it's an area of concern. It's an area that we know about, we know why, and we act on it. And one of the main reasons for that is the enhanced oversight that we have as a leadership team, including myself and Vicky Meveringham and Tom, our Director of Children's Services. We have oversight of all of our children's placements on a weekly basis, which provides us with an understanding about where's the best location, where's the best home setting for that child. And if reviewing that frequently means that there needs to be a change in placement that's going to better meet the needs of that child, we will take them bold decisions. Equally, it means that occasionally we're in the position where we need to make them bold decisions to make sure children are kept safe in that moment, hence why there is a small increase in that particular cohort of children. In terms of some of our challenges, one of our challenges is a quite significant decrease in the timeliness of our initial health assessments for our children, for our looked after children. It is the lowest that it's been over the last rolling 12-month period, and it's something that we have recognised over the last 4 or 5 months, and we've been working very closely with health colleagues, both to understand the reasons for that and to understand what resource we can put in to supporting, ensuring that there's a turnaround in that statistic, as well as helping with understanding where resource might be best used to make sure that we're getting the right support in the right areas. What we can be confident of is that irrespective of the initial health assessments, timeliness reducing to just 22% on a rolling 12-month period in January, if we extend that period to say how many of them are completed within a month of that date, that increases to 70%. So we know we're getting them done. We need to just deal with this in a different way going forward, hence, as we've discussed, working closely with health colleagues to address that going forward. We have discussed in this forum in a lot of detail, in fact, in the last scrutiny in relation to neurodevelopmental assessments. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because I think the same members were present in that meeting. We do continue to see an increase in waiting times for neurodevelopmental assessments, but as discussed in the previous session, we have a new process that health colleagues have implemented in relation to waiting well, where there's an element of ensuring that the children and young people waiting for those assessments have access at the earliest opportunity to whatever relevant support may be suitable for them. And we know that in many cases that is actually the destination that would be encountered should they wait till the end of the assessment period anyway. I just want to give a quick kind of oversight in terms of our placement breakdown. Also, something that we're very proud of is our breakdown in terms of our numbers of children that are using our in-house foster care provision. So we have more children that are in foster care provision compared to residential against statistical neighbours, our neighbours and national averages anyway. Over the last 6 months, we've seen a reversal of a trend, which means that more of our young people, by percentage, are within our internal foster care service as opposed to our independent fostering agencies. We're still working really closely with our independent fostering agencies, and they're a really important source of supporting our young people. We're having regular events with them to make sure that we're working very closely with them so that they can understand the needs of our young people, understand the additional support that we can provide as a local authority. But it is a trend that we want to continue to have, and we will be seeing in the coming months further updates in relation to our fostering recruitment strategy to further enhancing that provision. I'd like to provide a little bit of an update in relation to our children's homes. I believe that was a specific question, Councillor Cooper, that you requested. So I've mentioned this in this forum and other public forums previously, but I'm not going to be using the names of our individual children's homes, nor use any kind of initials or analogies. These are our children's homes, and we want to maintain the anonymity that's provided to all of the children in that area. So I'll refer to them more generically, but I can talk about some of the progress that we've made in recent months. What we have seen is, following a dip in performance in terms of our Ofsted outcomes between the later end of 2021 towards mid-22 and 2023, is an incremental improvement journey for a number of our homes. One of our homes has maintained an outstanding in all areas for the last 3 years, which is fantastic, particularly considering that it's had a change of manager last year. That manager is now our service manager, so we're breeding from within and trying to generalise some of the fantastic practice, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing an incremental improvement in our other homes during that period of time as well. So within the last 6 months, we've seen an improvement of another home going from requires improvements to good. We've seen another within recent months going from inadequate to requires improvements. We're well aware of what those improvements are, and we're working on them already. We have one home that is in a period of inadequate. We've recently carried out an internal audit stroke kind of mock assessment. Because we have a staff member that was previously an Ofsted inspector, we're utilising that experience to understand what areas we need to work on, as well as using the feedback and response of our Ofsted inspectors and our Reg 44 assessments, which is an independent way of getting additional feedback about how well our homes are run. And finally, we've got one home that's due to come online any day. We are hoping to get a response from our colleagues in Ofsted in the coming days. I last spoke to our regional inspector on Friday. I've been in regular contact with her to move this process as quickly as possible for the benefit of our young people, because we have a number of children that we feel that would be well matched to that home provision. Simultaneously, the final home to discuss had an improvement from previously being in a position of inadequate to requiring improvements, which means that we're now in a position to be able to place more children in that home also. So a bit more of a deep dive in terms of the trajectory that we're currently facing in that area. So we've experienced a number of changes in terms of the staff that have oversight in that area, but what we have had is a period of consistency, both in terms of the service manager and as myself as the responsible individual since last summer, and we believe that combined with utilising some of the skill of our leaders within other areas of children's services is really providing us with an optimistic outlook for our children's services, children's residential services going forward in this year. I think that's it for me, unless any questions before I hand over to Rob.
Any questions? No? Oh, Councillor Firth.
Just on that point, when a school is inadequate or requires improvement, the local authority almost as a hit squad, and they send lots of people in and lots of money to bring it up to standard. Does that apply to children's homes?
Sorry, I think I left myself on mic, so sorry, I'll come back directly. Quite often, some of the judgments that are made within children's homes are made because there are particular areas of judgment that mean if you are inadequate in one area, you are inadequate all over. So the investment, whether that's financial in terms of resource, isn't necessarily the solution. It could be because of particular areas in relation to oversight or leadership. It could be in relation to particular children's behaviours and the plans that relate to them or how well they've been followed. So what we're trying to do is to work in a very consistent way, as I said, utilising some of our leaders from across children's services to better formulate and understand some of the reasons why we've been in them positions and working in a really strategic and consistent way to improving them. It's not necessarily throwing money or necessarily resource at it. It's really understanding why is it that we're in that position, understanding and really working closely with our colleagues in Ofsted, being open with them about the challenges that we face, and using their support and their encouragement and their feedback, as well as I suggested, our Reg 44, that independent feedback that we receive to change the areas that we know need improving. So we continue to, this is not to dismiss the fact that we continue to invest in our residential homes and continue to staff them appropriately and continue to lead them appropriately in terms of that resource as well.
Well, thank you, Jay. I did use the wrong terminology. Special measures.
Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because we put a lot of time and resource and effort into improvement across the board in children's services. I think there probably is a bit of a feeling that we do parachute a lot of resources into schools, which we don't really. We offer our maintained schools a level of support, but often they're improvements done with our school improvement partners and by themselves. And it's pretty similar in terms of our internal residential homes, that we have an improvement function. We have an internal board that looks at themes called our Children's Homes for Children Improvement Board that moves things on. But I think what's quite different about our children's homes inspections is it can quite often be based on, the outcome can quite often be based on things that change very quickly. So, you don't see it in any other area, but, you can be inadequate and then you can be inspected within 3 months and you can be good again or requires improvement. You tend not to see that in, wider children's services inspections or in schools inspections. And that's often because the things that, as Kieran said, the things that Ofsted are looking at can sometimes be limiting judgments. So it's quite, more than happy to do a kind of more informal session around the inspection framework for you both. But I know Ofsted are also undertaking a series of events with their new leader calling the Big Listen, and one of them is looking at a different inspection regimes.
Yeah, I mean, we say it's Leeds City Council who were helping us for a while, but then they had their issues and their problems later, didn't they? So, it is something that the children's world can change quite quickly, can't it? So it's something you've got to be on the ball on all the time. Okay. Rob?
Hello, so I'm Rob Fordyce. I'm the Principal Social Worker in Children's Social Care and Head of Service for Quality Assurance and Practice Development, and I'm deputising for Vicky Metheringham today. So if there are any questions that I can't answer, I'll have to take them away, I'm afraid, and bring them back to you another date, but I'll try my best to answer any questions that come forward. So from the data booklet, one of the things I wanted to draw your attention to was the number of contacts we receive in our front door service, which is decreased from this time last year. Just thought it might be useful to add some context. When we say contacts, that's people contacting us. That's the difference between that and referrals, which is something that then results in some action from children's social care. So a contact could be someone ringing up. We may address that at the contact stage and not progress it to being a referral. We would take a referral if we think there's maybe some further digging around or action that needs taking. But there's a decrease in both those rates. Just for your reference, the decrease in referrals has gone down by around about 100, so that's 353 referrals to 253. Now looking at this, it's not possible to say exactly why that rate's gone down. Sometimes it does just happen. We have had a front door health check in February, which looks at the quality of our front door service, so from an outside agency's perspective, and they confirmed the effectiveness of our front door service. We do continue to work with partner agencies around the quality of their referrals and the information they share with us to help make sure that the referrals or contacts that do come through are appropriate for our agency. That work is ongoing, so we might actually see the numbers of contacts continuing to decline over the next few months. So it'll be interesting to see if that's the case. And we encourage other services to think about which service is best for the children or young person that they're worried about. We also have our weekly referral and review meetings, which gives us a bit of assurance about the quality of our decision making around the front door contacts. One thing that is interesting to look at is our re-referral rates. So that's when if a child is brought back for another referral at a later date. So our re-referral rate is 17.4% compared to an average across England of 22%. That gives me quite a lot of assurance that we're making the right decisions for children and young people at that first point of contact. Because if we were getting those decisions wrong, we'd be getting a lot of re-referrals. And that's something that I'd like us to think about when we look at the assessment and intervention figures. So our rate of children on child in need plans is 225 per 10,000 children. That's much lower than our statistical neighbours and the national average for England. I think this demonstrates that our children's plans, the child in need plans, are progressing well and we're making effective decisions about children and the support they need. I don't think it suggests that we haven't got enough children on child in need plans, because if that was the case, I think we would see a much higher re-referral rate down the line if we were taking children off child protection plans too quickly, for example, or when the work hadn't been finished. I think we're achieving this through having a real good oversight of our children on child in need plans. So we have oversight through regular meetings with our social workers and other practitioners working with these children to make sure we're making the right decisions for them. And this is going to continue being a focus of our work as well. We're providing support to our practitioners, to our social workers about how to make a good child in need plan, how to make sure the plans are effective and they're going to achieve their goals, and that's an ongoing piece of work. We've got a slight decrease in children subject to child protection plans. So it's sort of a decrease of 16 children from last month, but it's still an increase from this time last year. So that's something we're still looking at. What you will have noticed from the data booklet is that there's a decrease in the number of Section 47 investigations we're undertaking. So the process would be that we would have a referral come in, we would undertake a Section 47 investigation to determine what the next step should be. One of those next steps could be a child protection plan. So in about 50% of our Section 47s result in a child becoming subject to a child protection plan. because there's been a decrease in number of Section 47, I think it's fair to say we might see a decrease in the number of children on child protection plans over the next 6 months or so. But there is a bit of a lag because child protection plans are reviewed every 3 months. So there won't be an immediate decrease. So once a child's on a child protection plan, it might take a little while for them to come off it, but that's something that might happen over the next few months. There's been a bit of a decrease in our timeliness of our child and family assessments. So we are below our statistical neighbours and national comparators. So this is something that we're working on. And the timeliness of our core groups. So that's the meetings that take place for children on child protection plans. That's deteriorated. And the other thing we're a little bit concerned about is the number of child in need meetings that are overdue. So to address this, we've got a new structure for our social work teams, which we're moving into as of next month. So we're going to have larger teams, but with an additional capacity through a practice supervisor role, which we're creating. So we're going to have, the new teams will have around 5 practitioners with a practice supervisor for each of those 5 practitioners, but there'll be a team manager for 10 of those practitioners. So the structure will be team manager, 2 practice supervisors, 10 social workers. What we hope that means is that we'll have fewer decision makers. The team managers making the decisions, there'll be fewer of those. So we'll have more consistency in our decision making. But with the implementation of the practice supervisor role, that's additional capacity to really help improve the quality of our social work practice. So those practice supervisors will supervise 5 practitioners each. And what we're hoping is that those practice supervisors will have the capacity to really drive standards, make sure that we are holding our meetings in a timely way and that our assessments are being completed. And when they are completed, they're of the best possible quality. So that's the additional capacity level that we're introducing. So we're hoping that's going to have a real positive impact on the quality and timeliness of our work. That's in our assessment and intervention team specifically.
Okay, any questions on that at all? I mean, just a general comment is that children's services is a very heavy data area, but it's the interpretation and it's the commentary on that data which is the thing which gives us confidence. So that, I mean, that's where throughout this year I've been impressed by that. Tom, is there anything you want to say about Joanne Sanders' part of the world?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think I mean, just to pick up actually the bit on the 45-day assessments being below the national average, it's still been an increase on the what the performance was earlier on in the year. So I think we were around 55 or 60% of them done within 45 days earlier on the year, and we're at about 71.3% now. So even though that is slightly below the national average, it's still an increase. So I just wanted to say that. That point, Chair. And yeah, I think part of what I just wanted to say from an education point of view is that we have seen a decrease year to date in some of our exclusions, which is pleasing to see, and we know that some of that is to do with the work we've done one-to-one with schools and educational settings, but also some really good work through our Education Learning Partnership Board, looking at how schools can support one another with persistently disruptive behaviour and a number of other things. I think we're still concerned about the amount of children and young people with SEND needs and SEND support that we see either in permanent or temporary exclusions, and we're working across the system to improve that. I think in terms of our looked after children, we're also seeing a proportion of our looked after children who've got one or more episode of an exclusion, and we're working really closely with Louise Hallis from the virtual school to address that. But I think if you look at our data, particularly for exclusions and suspensions across the board, and I will caveat that by this being year to date, but year to date we tend to be either below or in line with our regional and statistical neighbours. Now that could change as the year moves on, obviously. And as I think some panel members have pointed out, when you look at the data, there's that spike in suspensions and exclusions. I think it's around October, November, December, which I think, you know, is reflective sometimes of the long terms and the building up of persistent disruptive behaviour that ends up in exclusions or suspensions. But we continue through our Kirklees learning strategy to look at reducing suspensions and exclusions and work across the board to do that. And I think it's also worth saying that we have really good, you know, regardless of whether schools are in multi-academy trusts or whether their local authority maintains schools, we have really good relationships with our education system in terms of providing that wider support. So, you know, we'll update the panel next year in terms of what the final year, the final figure was in terms of exclusions and suspensions, and bring that back, Chair.
So certainly at the beginning of the year, it was an area of concern. It was something that you'd honed in on some of the areas where the figures were up, you know, where particular schools had got policy, had got particular problems which were skewing the figures, and so it was noticeable to see that action was taken on that. And hopefully that will have helped things. So that's a very positive thing. So I'm glad to see that. Any other comments on that at all? The other area that interested me looking at the figures was the rise in elective home education. And so one of the thoughts that we mentioned earlier on about that was maybe unpacking that a bit and getting some sort of idea as to the reasons that people home educate and how much that reflects on changes in society and how much that reflects on the offer that we provide as Kirklees.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. And I think, as we said earlier, didn't we, that the rise in elective home education is following national trends, and we're looking at that. I think, you know, we are seeing a number of families who make a conscious choice to electively home educate, and that's absolutely their right to do that. We also see a number of families who we feel might be electively home educating because of their child's mental health. And I think we need to do a bit more unpicking that and understanding that about, you know, potential post-COVID impacts in terms of social anxiety and school anxiety. And then I think probably the third group we've got is some parents who may not want to electively home educate their children and young people, but feel because of their SEND needs that some of the settings we've got locally might not be able to best meet that need. And again, we need to work really closely with those parents to see what we can do about making sure they're an inclusive environments for our children and young people as widely as possible, really. And I think also the DFE are bringing in some new data sets around looking more closely at our children who are electively home educated. I think 3 times a year it's going to be, which should help us have a really clear breakdown of those reasons. I will say, you know, our children elective home educated team and children missing education team are very good at having eyes on our children and young people and giving us assurance around their learning and their safety, and particularly our children and young people who are children missing education. We actually have a RAG-rated process where we focus more closely on those that we think are more at risk. But I do think bringing something back the next, you know, municipal year, Chair, with some further breakdown would be really useful.
Okay, Councillor Lawson.
Yeah, just to welcome that. I think even at the height of COVID, we understood that there was something special going to happen over the intervening years, and I think part of it is homeschooling. But I think there was a wider set of studies to look at as well. I think outside this panel, I think we should all be really very interested in what official data there is and what official studies there are that are taking a longer term view about impacts on society from that point, from 2020. So yes, I'd welcome anything that comes along surrounding that. But the elective home studies is certainly a valuable part of that, and I think that'd be a good prism to look at this through.
Okay. Right. Next item is pre-decision scrutiny, cabinet decision on the horizon. Anything from yourself, Councillor Kendrick, that you want to raise with us?
I'm afraid not at the moment. There's nothing. I think most of the decisions to do with children have already been to Cabinet. I don't think we've anything in the near future. But obviously, I'll be looking at, as we move into next municipal year, what needs to be brought to scrutiny as soon as I can.
No news is good news, hopefully. Okay, so next item, feedback from panel members on issues considered by Corporate Parenting Board. Now, I believe that's myself and yourself, Councillor Lawson. Anything you want to raise that was brought up under the Corporate Parenting Board?
It was, as ever, corporate parenting is very useful to be just looking at some of the stats and some of how we view and look after the children in our care. Aside from the stock items that we do that we've seen today, most of them, I found there was one particular nugget of information though that was really quite interesting, and that was what came back from the virtual school, which was about the occasions of MISPAs and lateness being quite wrapped up tightly together in schools, that actually you can go in late to a school after a certain amount of minutes and you will be counted as absent rather than just late. And that, I think there's a bit of scope in there to skew the figures that it'd be really interesting to get underneath some of those figures. But I sense, having been a governor, that we have a lot of data in the hands of schools, and sometimes not the capacity of those schools to actually express that data or interrogate that data on our behalf. So there's a little bit of meat in there, I think, that needs just winkling out. Thank you.
For myself, I think I made a comment about there's a certain amount of repetition in terms of the data and places that we do it, and I think for me, actually that was a benefit, because sometimes when you, I think elected members sometimes need to hear things 2 or 3 times before it sinks in, and so though it can be, oh crikey, why are we saying this again? For us, and well, for me at least, I find it helpful to have things reinforced sometimes. And maybe that's my failing, I don't know, but it does help me. We also had we had a motion that came to council about children being looked after children being a protected characteristic, and so that came up during the meeting. And I think I'm quite interested to see, because it's been taken up by a number of different councils. It's a priority for the new leader of the LGA, and so for all those reasons, I think it's something that we want to keep an eye on and see how that best. What best practice looks like as far as that how that protected characteristic is actually applied. So that was one of the things which came out for me, and also we looked at children's homes and the standards in those again. But so those are my reflections. Okay. Anything else on that at all? No?
Just to say, Chair, yeah, it was. I mean, particularly. I looked after children having the protected characteristics. We were really pleased that went through full council, and we've had a lot of progress with our corporate parenting recently in terms of support from others. We're widening out, as you know, later on in the meeting we had the conversation about widening out the membership and the reach of the corporate parenting board to involve the third sector, to make sure the police are represented, to make sure health commissioners are better represented. We've had an ambassador, and I can't speak today, ambassadors event recently where local businesses and colleges got together and the university and a few others to kind of offer things to our children and young people to recognise their corporate parenting responsibility. So it feels like there's a real head of steam building, and particularly in that the national movement about recognising being a care leaver as a protective characteristic is getting some real movement as well. And I think, as you say, what the trick is, I think, is to interpret that for the everyday person or for, you know, members of other organisations and say, well, what does that mean then? You know, and what does that mean for our looked after children, and what does it mean for what we can offer? But yeah.
Okay. Right. Last item. Work programme and agenda plan for 23-24. Well, we're at the end of it, aren't we? So, so there we go. Some things have been carried over that we're looking at for the new municipal year, such as emotional wellbeing provision in Kirklees, keeping children in mind. But it will be up to the new new board to decide how that's done, and of course that's in the gift of the annual meeting of the council, which will occur after the elections. So all it remains for me to do is thank members. Councillor Firth.
Chair, before you do close the meeting, as you're aware, I've just joined this scrutiny panel. And even though I've been a councillor for many years, I didn't realise how complex and the Children's and Education Service was, and how much data and officers have to compile. And I just want to say that through you, because I'm sure you and Councillor Lawson agree with me, that we need to send a message out loud and clear that how much we do value everyone involved in our children's and education service. And I think many of the lots of work they do goes perhaps under the radar, and we need to send that message out loud and clear that they are valued. And of course, not to forget the cabinet member who was in charge. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. You've taken the words right out of my mouth, because I definitely was going to thank officers and Viv as a regular attender, Councillor Kendrick, for this. You know, I hope we haven't tested the principle of that there's no such thing as a stupid question to the limit. So that's. I always think that that's actually not really true. You know. There we go. Because having probably made one or two questions myself, that I think, oh, well, maybe. So thank you everybody. Thank you to Oliver for your contribution, and I understand you're standing down from the role this time. But yeah, that's much appreciated for that. Okay, I think all that remains is thank you very much, and thank you to the officers who support the panel as well. Much appreciated. Thank you, Helen. Okay, this meeting is closed.